from the BBC World Service in association with ABC and All India Radio. This is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell in London, where Christmas has come early, can you believe? I'm not going to see my parents or my brother and his family over Christmas because I'll be in Australia covering the test matches over with Channel 7. So we've had a bit of a faux Christmas day, an early one, even involved Christmas crackers getting all together. Great fun. And then I'm off to host a round of a celebrity sports quiz later on this week for bowel cancer awareness. So I'm really looking forward to stoking up a little bit of competitiveness between the teams on the night. It's always a great occasion, that one.
Slowly warming up here in Sydney to the cricket summer. Jim Maxwell for the ABC. And perhaps the most interesting thing for me at the moment is we try to get a head around the sort of cricket that is being played before the Test series against Pakistan. Is the performance of my own club, Eastern Suburbs, who won their first 4 games of the season. And it's that sense of what happens in your local community that's got me as aroused about the cricket season as anything else. And that's been very gratifying.
And I'm Sunil Gupta for All India Radio Delhi, and I'm getting my breath back. Well, almost, if you get my drift. After an October in which I was in 4 different cities and 6 different hotels in 25 days. So I understand what our touring cricketers go through now.
Well, don't be getting your breath back, Sunil. Hasn't Delhi been shrouded in a pretty bad smog recently?
Ah, yes, I was wondering when you'd raise that, and that was the reason for my getting my breath back.
Yeah.
Well, where do I start? Actually, the geographical factors and other factors, human factors that come into play. Delhi is landlocked, as you see. It's like a funnel, so it just gets everything inside. We have more vehicles in Delhi than all the other metros combined. So, there's that sort of pollution. And there's sort of the Rajasthan desert in the south where all the sands come in from. Then, of course, we just had Diwali. And even though it was a quieter Diwali than before, there were crackers, a lot of them on Diwali Day. So those emitted a lot of smoke. And then, of course, the big one is that there's a lot of burning of stubble. So after you harvest the crops, the stubble isn't pulled out by machines, but it's burnt, which obviously then adds. And that's really been the major cause of the smog that's been here in Delhi over the last couple of weeks.
In terms of sport and playing cricket in these conditions, I've been in Mohali in northern India when there's been December, November fog, but not smog. But in Delhi, they still played the first T20 international, and Bangladesh beat India in front of what was a big crowd. But the authorities have been advising people to avoid strenuous exercise, haven't they? Was there any thought given to moving that match, or are, cricketers seen as kind of higher beings who won't be affected by the smog?
Well, it was poetic justice, wasn't it, Bangladesh beating India? There were some murmurs about moving it out, but it was far too late. So obviously people have got to keep in mind the scheduling next time round in winter, not to have it in Delhi around this point of time. But, the ground was full. Firozshah Kotla was absolutely packed to the brim. And it's like, those warnings you get on cigarette packs. Well, you look at them, but you ignore them, and that's exactly what happened. So, yes, it's funny, isn't it, with all the smog around and all the talk about it, and yet you had a full house. So, well, it's dissipating a little now. The weather's changing. There's some clouds coming in and some rain and so on and so forth. But the underlying problem, I think, still persists and needs to be dealt with.
Let's get on with the show, though, because I am excited about our first guest. He's one of my favourite people in cricket, worked with him a lot here on the BBC, and he is undoubtedly the coolest man ever to have lifted a cricket bat. He is quite simply an icon of the game.
Typical Richards shot. Richards gets a full toss and hits a 6 over square leg, fittingly ending the innings with a 6.
189 now to Richards.
That's his 300. Vivian Richards, 300 not out.
Chappell is on the front foot. There's hesitation running between the wickets. He's out. Brilliant bit of fielding by Richards. A brilliant bit of fielding by Richards. Runs, turn out.
And there is his 100, and Gooch in fact misfields, and it goes for 4. And Richards waves his bat high in the air, a broad grin on his face.
And Australia have been beaten, West Indies have won, and they are the world champions of this international cricket.
The crowd rises to a man, woman and child as Vivian Richards comes out for what now will be his last innings in Test cricket.
Sir Vivian Richards, the former West Indies captain, and, well, his style and swagger pretty much epitomise that dominant West Indies side of the 1970s and 80s. And Viv was in London this week to promote tourism in his homeland of Antigua at the World Travel Market. I caught up with him to get his thoughts on the current West Indies side and to ask him a series of questions that were sent in by you, our Stumped listeners. Now, the West Indies were pretty disappointing at the 50-over World Cup earlier this year, and they finished, 9th out of 10 teams. So a few changes have been made. Kieran Pollard is their new white ball captain and Phil Simmons has come back as head coach. So does Viv think that those appointments could spark a revival?
Well, this is what we hope. Phil, who would have been there before, is back. And I would never ever knock appointments of maybe coaches, but give them an opportunity for them to home in their skills and the things that they can achieve in future. Yes, I can only wish him the best.
Then the next World Cup is a T20 World Cup, the West Indies defending champions. What do you feel needs to happen or needs to change between now and then? Should there be a focus on fitness? Is it about getting key players like Sunil Narayan back on the field?
Well, I think he's a plus, especially when he's firing. I think also that fitness maybe also plays a huge part in the guys being able to get the things done. And for those, who needs to get fit, I think the establishment should maybe be in their ears that if there's a fitness clause that you got to be at X level in order for you to be part of the team and you're not, well, I think some measures should be taken in future. We cannot afford to be working with half-fit guys.
What about Chris Gayle? He's not in the West Indies squad for the ODIs and T20s against Afghanistan. He says he's still available after he reversed his retirement. Do you think the West Indies team now simply moves on without him, or is there still room for him?
Well, I think at some point there's a lot of great players who passed through West Indies cricket. We move ahead when Brian Lara retired. We moved ahead when so many individuals who would have made such a huge contribution to West Indies cricket. But there are times where Chris, I think he knows in himself. Let's see, because I'll never ever knock an individual wanting to go on for a longer period of time, especially when he would have announced his retirement. But if he's going to do that on a basis where he's productive, that's okay. If it's non-productive, well, I think he should have a second thoughts about that.
And thinking about the T20 game, Viv, I mean, if I'd imagined you playing T20 cricket, you would have been an absolute crowd puller. You were anyway, but it came just too late for your career. I mean, you would have cleaned up in that format.
I'll tell you something, man. I haven't forgiven the guys who introduced it after we had passed, when we were fully over. I still got some beef to pick with those individuals. Why didn't you do it maybe at least 3 years earlier? I would have been okay, I guess.
When did you last pick up a bat? Do you play charity games in the T20 format?
No, especially I also, as a mentor for the PSL, which is the Quetta Gladiators, I do a lot of work with individuals in that sense. Yeah. And sometimes guys who you are mentoring, you'll pick their bat ups and see how that feels, compare that to the one which you had, and yes, little things like that.
It'd be great to watch you with bat in hand again. Some questions from our Stumped listeners for you, Viv, here. We've got one from Sudanva Pulvenda, who asks, is playing in the West Indies rewarding enough financially for people to play test cricket for them?
I've always believed that, and sometimes why I'll say this, it's because when guys start out, they do not start out wanting to make money. They started out because they loved it. And the other way around, in my opinion, is going to spoil this magnificent game, which we appreciate and love for so many years. Whatever your performance is, if you're good enough, you will earn. But if you set out with the process, wow, I'm going to play this T20 because it's a money earner. No, guys before that wanted to play test match cricket. And I think we've got to find a balance. We've got to find a balance because why I say this as well, to elaborate a little bit more, you have sometimes some guys can hardly spell the game cricket. But because of the lucrative contracts that they see in T20, they're going to jump this hurdle to try and get to that next hurdle. And sometimes they don't quite understand the game. You look at the best T20 players in the world. The best T20 players in the world are individuals who would have played test match cricket, learning that game from the beginning. Not the individuals who just starts playing because they see T20 is going to make them millionaires and whatever in the future.
And in 3 words, the best bowlers that you ever faced. That's come from Pudsey St Lawrence Cricket Club.
Well, the best bowlers, I would have said Dennis Lilly, I have him at number 1. The next best individual, I guess, would have been Abdul Qadir, who is no longer with us. then another guy in India by the name of Chandrasekhar.
Nice one. And then Barry Hainsworth says, your portrait at Lord's, Viv, have you seen it? Does it scare you too? He says. What do you think of your portrait at Lord's?
I think it's good. It makes me look like a Vivian Richards, a rough diamond.
Yeah.
That is okay.
You're larger than life. I think we can too.
Yeah.
Viv, an absolute pleasure having you on Stumped. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you too. Have a good day.
Well, that is the West Indies great, Sir Vivian Richards. I love the fact it still rankles with him that he never got to play T20. I mean, he would have absolutely cleaned up, wouldn't he?
So would some of the other great players who never got the chance. But the power that he brought to batting, would have obliterated a number of attacks as it did in Test cricket and 50-over cricket. Yeah, he would have been a sensation.
Some great questions we had there from our listeners as well. It was fascinating, I thought, to hear Viv name the three best bowlers that he'd ever faced as Dennis Lillee, Abdul Qadir and then Bhagwath Chandrasekhar. We actually asked statistician Andrew Sampson to have a look at Viv's numbers against those three, and I've got a couple of little interesting nuggets. So Dennis Lillee dismissed Viv 9 times in 11 tests, which is more often than anybody else, with Kapil Dev and Ian Botham second, with 7 dismissals. Now, Chandrasekhar got him out 4 times in 8 tests. Abdul Qadir only got him 3 times in 7 tests. But in ODIs, he's amongst the leaders and got Viv 5 times in 25 matches. Sort of interesting also that 2 of the 3 that he named were leg spinners.
Well, yes, and he was fortunate, I suppose, to play before Warne came into his pomp. That would have been a great battle to enjoy. So it's been an era that he talks about where spin, particularly Indian spin, was quite dominant until the West Indies came along with their pace attack and made a mess of it. But Chandrasekhar, Bedi, Prasanna and Venkataraman, the 4 great spinners of that period. But as you say, the ball going away from the bat, perhaps more dangerous than the off spin that he played against and normally took to town.
Yeah, a bit of an accolade, Sunil, for Chandrasekhar's name to be up there amongst Viv's best.
Well, he was a terrific bowler. I don't know whether you ever saw him in action, but I did. And I can tell you one of the reasons perhaps that Sir Viv brought that up in the conversation was that in his debut test match back in 1974 in Bangalore, he was out both times to Chandrasekhar and he made just 4 and 3 on his debut. So I think that must have been somewhere in the back of his mind when he mentioned that. But yes, I mean, I'm glad that he mentioned Chandra because Chandra wasn't really the orthodox leg spinner. You know, he was flatter and quicker. And in fact, Farooq Engineer, I remember saying that he was as quick as the medium paces at some points of time. So it was good to hear his name because I think that, he was very underrated when he was playing and, of course, faded away quite quickly. But I think that was one of the reasons why he mentioned him.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on All India Radio.
Right, on to a talking point from India this week, because the question is, could we soon see substitutes in the Indian Premier League? Now, some new proposals have been put forward, which would mean teams would be allowed to pick a squad of 15 players in the IPL, and they could make changes to the 11 at the fall of a wicket or at the end of an over. So, say you lose a few early wickets and you need another batsman to shore up the innings, you could sub them in at number 9, or if the pitch is turning more than you expected and you had a spinner on the bench, you could then bring them into the action. So discussions over this so-called power player idea took place at the Board of Control for Cricket in India this week, but a date has yet to be set for a trial, and they will need to trial this perhaps at a different domestic level first. But we've heard a BCCI spokesman, an official, quoted as saying the concept has the potential to change the game. What do you reckon? You in favour? And we have seen substitutes tried before at international level, not least.
Well, yes, in principle, I think it's a good idea. Let's, all the other games, whether it's soccer or even hockey, I mean, hockey has rolling substitutions, so there are...
Saved my career, that did.
So I'm saying, in the IPL, definitely, perhaps in the ODIs, but I think there's got to be a limit. I mean, you can't have, 20 over a game, 4 substitutes coming in and so on and so forth. I think it would just slow the game down, and so I think you need to be able to control the number. But I think, as Jim said, I mean, there's been, the concussion sub and then the specialist wicket-keeping sub, and we've seen all of those being used in the last couple of series, certainly certainly the India-South Africa series, we saw that happen. And if you remember, back in July 2005, there was this concept of the super sub that was tried, but it only lasted 9 months because they hadn't got it right. Because the team winning the toss had too much advantage because the team losing the toss had already put in a name and they couldn't take advantage of losing the toss. So I think they've got to tweak it right. And I do think actually they're planning to trial it in an Indian domestic tournament in the next couple of months before the IPL starts. So let's see what happens there.
I suppose having that squad of 15 as opposed to just naming one super sub, as was that 2005 concept in ODIs, that takes away that sense of the advantage given to the team who wins the toss, because you've got choice and options. But I think a key thing for T20 is how much added time is this going to add on to, IPL games are already stretching sort of way beyond the set idea for, the fast and furious nature of T20 with timeouts. But then, I've got to work out how many times can you substitute? Once you've been subbed in, could you be subbed out? And I wonder if you've been subbed off, could you then get subbed back in? Clearly a lot of detail that probably needs to be worked through. But here's a little trivia question for you both then. You mentioned the super sub. Do you remember who the first ever super sub was in that 2005 game?
I do.
Go on, Sunil.
I do. Vikram Solanki.
It was. And here you go, part B for the question. Who did he substitute for?
Good.
Thought I might get you with that one.
Yes.
I think it was Simon Jones he came on for.
It was a batsman for a bowler. So, there you are.
But then again, I actually don't know that he actually got to bat in the end. I think they had to nominate the sub for the start of the innings, and I think England won that game by 9 wickets or something, so they didn't actually
that was the point.
Didn't actually get a bat.
Yes.
Anyway, we will keep you posted if the BCCI trial this, but another innovation for cricket.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on All India Radio.
Well, that's it for this week's Stumped on All India Radio. You can stay in touch with us on Twitter via @BBCWS Sport using the hashtag BBC Stumped. My thanks to Sunil Gupta and Jim Maxwell, and to you for listening. Join us again next time. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association